Well, hell, don't run off. It's me. Well, what? Skin this.
Hello, YouTube. I've been busy fighting cancer, so like Jeremiah, I look different. But don't run off. I'm still Joey Russo, disabled competitive pistol shooter and retired Rangemaster, here with another episode of the Rangemaster's Bench to cover my 2,000 round review of the OA Defense 2311 and to answer the question, is it a hobby grade gun at a duty grade price? As usual, before we begin, let me add my standard disclaimer. These are obviously still only my professional opinions based on over 30 years of serving in professions of arms. So you will better understand my perspective, I'll once again post down below my training and experience. I will also add as a warning, any attempt to replicate my actions are discouraged and done so at your own risk. I'll assume no responsibility. Lastly, since no one outranks safety, do know all firearms have been safely confirmed clear and unloaded and no live ammunition is in the room. Alright, with that out of the way, let's get down to it. As you may recall, about 4 months ago I purchased this OA Defense 2311. If you haven't seen my first look video yet, you should before watching this presentation. I'll post a link below. Since buying the 2311, I've been able to get just over 2,000 rounds through it at the range and shooting a couple matches as well. I also spent a considerable amount of time at the bench working on it and in the process becoming intimately familiar with the design. I'm now in a better position to share my experiences, offer an educated opinion, and then a final recommendation. Let's begin the story by going to the bench where I'll show you all the details of what I called Project 2311. Sight replacement. Recall the 2311 came stock with bright tritium night sights consisting of an orange outline front and U-notch rear. That's a fact. For over half my law enforcement career, all we used were irons. Sights are a very subjective, personal thing, but here's my perspective. Very early in my career, I stopped using night sights. What? While this is meant to make you chuckle, law enforcement firearms training was very dogmatic when I started my career. Officer Jurassic's comment here was a widely held belief, and one of the first doctrines I challenged. Later would come idea of MRDS on a duty handgun, but that's a story for another time. While concept of night sights made sense, what I quickly learned in real-world use was if lighting conditions were so poor as to make aiming with glowing night sights necessary, then it was too dark to make positive identification, or PID, of a potential threat without using a flashlight, weapon-mounted light, or some other external light source. I also came to realize night sights, with their thick front blades and chunky wide-notch rears, were a real detriment to my being able to shoot accurately, particularly on distant and or smaller targets. I had a hard time perceiving alignment errors between front, rear sight, and target, and night sights also obscured so much of what I was trying to hit. After leaving night sights behind, I ultimately settled on either a fiber optic or gold bead front of between 115 to 120 thousandths width and a blacked out rear with square notch, having a matching width as my front. This configuration is what I have ran for duty, carry, and range competition use for many decades. So, after a couple hundred rounds with the 2311 in its stock configuration, I replaced the night sights. The 2311 uses P320 dovetails, so Dawson Precision to the rescue. Up front, I have a P320 fiber optic front of 115 thousandths wide and 210 thousandths tall, while in back, I used a 225 thousandths tall Charger model designed for legacy P-Series guns with 115 thousandths wide square notch. As an FYI, with a little fitting you can adapt most sights for legacy P-Series guns like the P226 for use on P320s. This setup has rounds impacting above fiber, near the top of the blade, and has allowed me to exploit the pistol's accuracy potential. Slide stop repair. At about 200 rounds, I started to experience intermittent failures of the slide to lock back on an empty magazine. This got progressively worse so that by 300 rounds, no empty magazine would lock the slide open. Troubleshooting the issue discovered during recoil impulse, the factory stock slide lock plunger had peened a deep divot into the slide lock, as you can see here where I've circled. The plunger resting in this divot was effectively keeping the slide lock in the down position despite an empty mag follower pushing up on it. Knowing the hardness of the slide lock was suspect, to repair it, I took an EGW plunger and reprofiled it to have a wider than divot flat interface with the slide stop. This has been working flawlessly now for nearly 2,000 rounds. Replacing the mag release. Just like on my P320s, I wanted to replace the mag release on my 2311 with something easier for me to reach. When I removed the OEM MIM mag release, I noticed it had two bevels ground into it, which I've circled here. I was initially questioning why it had the bevels. After installing the machined Wilson Combat mag release, it became quickly apparent why the stock mag release had the bevels. The Wilson had a ledge sticking up that would catch the front edge of the mag during loading and stop it dead in its tracks. So as you look in through the mag well of the pistol to the bottom, you can see this ledge sticking up here, and that would stop the mag from being fully inserted. Solution, of course, was to use a carbide cutter to cut a similar bevel into the machined and hard surface finish Wilson Combat mag release. Memorama. At this point, I need to come clean regarding my bias I have against using MIM parts in 1911s. I don't like them. Here's why. There was a time my agency issued Kimber 1911 duty pistols which used MIM parts, and we had many issues keeping them running. One of the worst was with thumb safety locks breaking. Imagine you're carrying your 1911 cocked and locked on duty, and the thumb safety lock pad just falls off. To deal with this, we ended up preemptively installing machined Wilson Combat bulletproof thumb safety locks. And there's more examples, but you get the picture. Here's the deal. If you have a quality made MIM part, then it will be almost as good as a well-made machine part, and it should have an acceptable service life. If it's a poorly made MIM part, it likely will fail, of course without warning and at the worst possible time. How can you tell good MIM from bad MIM? That's the problem. You really can't. So, my practice has been to stack odds in my favor and use quality machine parts whenever possible, and this is what I did with the 2311. Here is the list of OEM parts I ended up replacing or removing. Starting from the top here, we have our thumb safety locks. Remember from the first video, we have a scant safety, which I'll talk about the repair I did there. Hammer and sear pins look to be machine parts. The disconnector is MIM. The sear is MIM. The hammer and hammer strut are both MIM. You'll see the hammer pin. There's a deadline associated with that, which I'll cover in more detail here soon. Our firing pin stop is MIM. The magazine release I already talked about is MIM. The thumb safety lock slide stop plungers and spring. I mentioned the slide stop repair already. And then lastly, the sear spring, which is proprietary. I'll end up removing that entirely, which I'll explain here in just a moment. Replacing ignition parts. When it came to replacing the MIM ignition parts, I decided to hit the easy button and install Nighthawk Customs drop-in trigger system. This self-contained unit uses a stainless steel housing to hold high-quality steel internal components in perfect alignment. I've had this for a while waiting for a project to use it in, and the 2311 was a perfect candidate. Since sear spring function is integral to the drop-in trigger system, I was able to completely remove the 2311's proprietary sear spring, shown here again on the right. Over a course of 2,000 rounds, the Nighthawk Custom drop-in trigger system has worked really well. It settled in delivering a crisp pull of just under 3.5 pounds with nice predictable reset. I've been impressed and would not hesitate to use it again in another project. Looking down here you can see the proprietary MIM mainspring housing, which is held in place via slotted tabs in the grip module. Hammer pin deadline. While tearing the 2311 apart, I came across yet another duty gun deadline, an unstaked hammer pin. When it comes to 1911 hammer pins, there are two options. For duty or personal defense guns, the hammer pin needs to be staked in position, as shown here on the right. For range use guns, an interference fit whereby fitment between the hammer, strut, and hammer pin is tight enough to keep things together is acceptable. What is never acceptable is a hammer pin that is so loose it just falls out. This loosey-goosey arrangement is what the 2311 has. During use, a loose hammer pin can bind the hammer movement as it slides around and contacts the sides of the frame. During disassembly, a loose hammer pin can fall out and be lost too. Scant safety repair. Recall during the first quick look video, I discovered my 2311 was deadline right out of the box with a scant thumb safety lock. This meant I could not safely put the 2311 in condition 1 or cocked and locked, that is with a round chambered, hammer cocked, and thumb safety lock in on position, locking the sear into the hammer. During my detailed inspection, I discovered the reason for scant safety was due to the thumb safety lock's lug sear engagement surface being rounded off, as I'm trying to show you here and here. I've never seen something like this before. It looks like someone took a belt sander or rotary tool and sloppily removed too much material. To contrast, here on the right, here is the new EGW thumb safety lock I fitted for use with the Nighthawk Customs drop-in trigger system sear. Notice how during fitting, the lug sear engagement surface is carefully filed flat, kept level to maximize even contact with the sear. Recoil spring drama. So early on while shooting the 2311 in factory configuration, my impression was the gun was snappy, cycling violently, especially with factory loads. In an effort to address this, I went down the 2311 recoil spring rabbit hole. First, the 2311 recoil spring guide rod is a proprietary design with a diameter of 311 thousandths and having a slightly shorter length than a 5-inch 1911 guide rod, as I show here in the comparison. The stock 2311 recoil spring shown here is flat wire and is of course designed to fit over the factory guide rod diameter. And here was the problem. All the 1911 flat wire recoil springs I could find are for use with smaller 250 thousandths diameter guide rods. I contacted OA Defense customer service about recoil springs and was informed in addition to using full-size 1911 flat wire recoil springs, some users have had good luck with X5 Legion recoil springs. Okay, thanks. Here's an example X5 recoil spring, and using this you can see would obviously require cutting a bunch of coils off. So I opted instead to first try using 1911 5-inch recoil springs and then later 4 1/4 inch recoil springs. Experimenting with 5-inch 1911 recoil springs had me cutting 2 to 4 coils off. The gun functioned and recoil impulse was better, but I didn't like how the spring stacked on the guide rod, almost binding. As you can see here, the distance between coils is stacked and it's almost binding. Cutting more than 4 coils off puts the 5-inch spring at nearly the same length as a 4 1/4 inch spring, which led me to my solution of using a Wolf 4 1/4 inch recoil spring with a Wilson Combat shock buff. I cut the owl ears off as shown here so that the shock buff would fit the 2311's round recoil spring guide rod base. This setup has worked very well, and I have experimented with 16 pound, 15 pound, and 13 pound spring weights. using 16 pounds for hot NATO plus P 124, 15 pounds for pretty much everything else, and then 13 pounds for my soft bunny fart hand loads. Being able to tune the recoil spring to load, the 2311 recoil impulse is much nicer now. I found the shock bus easily lasts 600 plus rounds and provides some peace of mind in protecting the aluminum frame from being battered by the slide. Ejector and extractor. The 2311 ejector is of MIM construction and is a proprietary design, but installs into the frame in a familiar 1911 fashion. I noticed the serial number circled here is inscribed on the ejector, suggesting some degree of individual fitment during manufacture. To access the extractor, you must first remove the slide cover plate by removing 2 screws, as shown here. Running irons, this is not that big of a deal, but if an optic was installed, you would first have to remove the optic to expose the plate screws. Once the plate is removed, you unscrew the silver extractor pivot pin, and the extractor and spring is then removed out of the slide. While many other pistols have this same remove plate and optic to access extractor setup, I do find it suboptimal for ease in performing regular maintenance. The 2311 extractor is from a SIG P365 and is also MIM. It is the current production heavier style with oblong pinhole and hook pivot point. As an FYI, here's a comparison with the earlier original P365 extractor design that is thinner, with a round pinhole and a rounded non-hook pivot point. So here's the final product. Was it worth the time and effort? Did I try and make a silk purse out of a sow's ear? Let me now give you my final assessment. Let's start the wrap up with a segment I call 3 ups and 3 downs. Here I'll cover the 3 biggest attributes and 3 most critical deficiencies. Being a glass half full kind of guy, I always prefer to start with the good. So my first positive is innovation. I've been on periphery of and working with the firearms industry for many years, and I know how challenging it can be for companies to succeed, especially for startups. For a new company like OA Defense to be created and take a unique design successfully from concept to manufacture deserves recognition. Next up, reliability. I quickly dismissed this as a gun for serious use, so I didn't bother trying duty self-defense loads. But my 2311 ran with all manner of ball range ammo. 115 grain, 124 grain, 124 grain NATO plus P, and 147 grain subsonic flat nose. The cycle of operation was never interrupted, and once I addressed the slide lock plunger issue, it would even reliably lock open on an empty magazine. The last attribute is accuracy. Once I tuned it up with preferred Dawson sights, Nighthawk trigger system, and the Wolf recoil spring Wilson Combat shock buff, my 2311 demonstrated what I consider good precision, with 5-shot groups averaging around 2.5–3 inches when shot freestyle at 15 yards. Now, for the not so good. My first negative is value. With LE discount, the 2311 was $2,000 delivered, which places it within a couple of $100 of an LE discounted Staccato P, which I also own. Chock full of MIM parts with questionable fitment, the build quality of my 2311 is nowhere near my Staccato P, which uses properly fitted machine parts throughout. At the beginning, I posed the question, is it a hobby grade gun at a duty grade price? To answer, unfortunately, I think the 2311 is. Next deficiency is durability. Notice I frame it as a question. How long will the 2311 last? With MIM parts of questionable quality and or fitment, who knows? Also, I worry how robust the polymer tabs of the grip module retaining the mainspring housing are. Finally, lack of support. I've been trying for months to purchase spare parts, particularly proprietary ones like the slide locks, ejector, and so forth. OA Defense has explained they're unable to sell spare parts at this time, as they do not have a surplus parts inventory built up yet. This leads me to think things are pretty tight with every part they have going to build guns and perhaps warranty work. All of which brings me to my final recommendation. Understanding this is based on a sample size of 1, in my assessment, the 2311 is not a duty or personal defense gun. No way I would trust my or other lives on this pistol. As a range use only gun, if you are willing to pay the high price for convenience of being able to use P320 mags, roll the dice on MIM components, build quality, and absent being able to buy spare parts, rely on a manufacturer's warranty to address any issues, then the 2311 might be for you. As for me, until proprietary spare parts are available for purchase, my 2311 will be mothballed in the safe. I'm Joey Russo, disabled competitive pistol shooter and retired Rangemaster. Thanks for watching. Until next time, take care, and remember, where there's a will, there's always a way. Don't let anything keep you from pursuing your passion.